How's it going, my friend? It is Danny here from projectmanaverse.com, real world technical project management for beginners. And today I'm going to share with you some pro tips for defect management. And I'm also going to try and get through the video without tilting my head like this, because I've noticed I keep doing that, but it's really hard to do it. So I'm going to try my best to keep my head straight this time. And I'm looking at the left of the phone because that's where the camera is. So it's hard to not look at myself. So it's a bit awkward, but give it my best shot. Anyway, right, defect management pro tips. So first of all, what is defect management? Well, with an IT project, technical project, you're obviously building something, you're developing something, you're coding something, some kind of software, you're either upgrading it or building something from scratch. And in order to be able to ensure you have the highest quality of product, you need to test that before you put it out to the live environment and to the end customers. So you have various testing phases in your project lifecycle, and as you're testing, if you find things are not quite right, they've not been built to the requirements and it's not working correctly, that is what we call a defect. So you'll have lots of defects on your project as you're going through testing. They all get logged somewhere, and it's very important to manage those defects carefully and correctly and efficiently so they get fixed before ideally you'll go live. So that's what defect management is. It's managing those defects to make sure they're all sorted out and prioritized ahead of your project go live. So that's what defect management is. You should really care about this because number one, the defect management is really critical, especially in the last phases of your testing, usually when you're doing your user acceptance testing, when the actual business or end users are getting to have a go at the application. And it's usually a very fast-paced, critical time because this is your last chance to get the product right and get it to a good quality before it goes out to the customer. So it's really important. This is your last opportunity to make sure your project is going to be a success by having a really good quality project and a quality product. And the timelines are often aggressive because unfortunately the testing, especially this user acceptance testing, is usually at the end of the project. So especially if you're working to a line in the sand deadline, you have to go live by this certain date. With everything else that comes before that in the project, if you slip a little bit and your timelines are delayed, it's not the end of the world for that bit of the project because you can just shift the timelines to the right. But if everything keeps shifting to the right, it's that work at the end of the project which really suffers, because if you can't push back your go live date, then you have to eat away at your testing time. So you might have started the project at the start of the project, you had planned 2 months of testing. By the time you actually get to it, because you've had so many delays before then, you've only got 4 weeks to do it. So it's often very fast paced, people are stressed, there's so much going on. So it's really important that you can do this defect management as efficiently as possible, because the faster and better you can do it, the more likely you are to go live. And doing this process badly can result in your project not going live. And it is difficult, especially with bigger projects. It can be sometimes overwhelming with the amount of defects that can get raised and trying to stay on top of them and making sure you're assigning resource to the right ones, the highest priority ones. It can be very tricky. So it's really important that you understand it. And in an ideal world, you have your own test manager or defect manager managing this process for you. But even if you do, you still need to be on top of it as a project manager and put pressure on them and really understand the process and make improvements where you need to and call things out when it's not going right and really be vocal if it's not working. So you need to be all over it. And it might fall to you to actually manage some of the defect process for some aspects of your project. So at some point you're probably going to have to do it yourself, but even if you don't, you need to understand it and be all over the people that are actually doing it. And there's various ways you can support even if you're not managing it yourself. So that's why it's important. Let's move on to my pro tips then. I've got quite a few. So number one, up front, agree and get signed off the criteria for classifying your defects. So the standard way of doing this is when you have a defect, you give it a severity. How severe is this defect? You usually score it between 1 and 5, 1 and 4. 1 is it's an absolute showstopper. The system doesn't even turn on. Software doesn't turn on. We can't do anything without that. That's pretty black and white, that one. You don't get many Sev 1s in your defect in your testing cycles. Sev 2 is pretty critical, and Sev 2 usually don't have a workaround available. A workaround is, can you work around the defect in another way to still get the outcome you wanted from the software or from the process? So if you've got a defect blocking you, it's not working correctly, can you still get the outcome you want by being clever with the system, working around it, or doing something else in the background? Sev 2 is usually pretty important. There's no workaround available, which is why it's a Sev 2. It's important we get a fix for it, because without a fix, then we're stuck basically. Sev 3 is not as important. Then Sev 4s and Sev 5s are more about, nice to have cosmetic things like the screen doesn't look quite nice or the color's wrong, those kind of things. So it's important you understand that, because what you'll find is the business, the people doing the testing, if something is important to them, even if it's not really critical, they'll just raise it as a Sev 2. They'll want it fixed, so that if they put it as a Sev 2 straight away, they know it's going to get their priority and resources looking at it. But it might not really be a Sev 2. They're just trying their luck with that. It's more like a Sev 3, but because it's impacting their process, their part of the business, they want it sorted quickly. So they might try their luck and pull a fast one, if you will, and raise it as a Sev 2 when it's not. So it's important you get that clearly defined and clarified at the start. So if you do sense that someone's trying their luck, you can just refer to the criteria and say, well, look, that doesn't actually fall into the classification of a Sev 2, so put it as a Sev 3. So that's number one. Get that agreed with everyone and make sure it's communicated and published. Number 2, set up a triage call. And a triage call is a call to look at the problems as they're arising with your testers before they get raised as defects, because sometimes there'll be a problem with the system, or a user will have a problem with the system. They might think it's a defect, but actually it's just because they're not using the system correctly, or they're lacking the training. So it's important to have a little triage call to go through that, understand what the issue is, and then agree together. If it is a defect, then you raise a defect, and then you actually triage the severity of those defects and the priority. That triage word is used in the medical industry a lot. I think it was first used in World War I, when people are injured on the field and you have a decision to make as to which person gets treated first, because there isn't enough nurses or doctors to treat everyone. So who goes first? Obviously the person with the greater life-threatening injuries. They triage the patients. It's with the defects, you're triaging the defects, which ones are really critical, which ones are important. So you're assigning that severity, the accurate severity, to make sure the most severe ones get looked at first. So that's your kind of pre-defect call, is that triage meeting. Get the people that are doing the testing, because you don't want to set hairs running when it's not really an issue. You don't want to keep raising defects when they're not defects, because it gets unmanageable. So make sure you have that call to just double check that it's truly a defect before it's raised. Next pro tip, and you should probably do that daily if you can as well. Next pro tip is set up your daily defect status call. You might even want to have these twice a day. It's up to you. It depends how big the project, depends on how many defects you have being raised. But the defect status call is to go through the actual status of all the defects once they've been logged in whatever system you're using. You have some kind of company software probably to log your defects. But you want to go through that. You want it to be very short and snappy. You've got a lot to get through in these calls, so you can't have long conversations and debates on them. You want to keep it snappy. Make sure all the defects statuses are the latest. So if it's ready for deployment to an environment, it says that. If it's ready for a retest, it says that. If it's still under investigation, you want to make sure people are keeping those tickets up to date and the status is up to date, so you know exactly what the latest status is. And people should be coming along to that meeting knowing what the latest status is, to be able to give some kind of update. It's there as a control. You're just making sure there's focus on it, because ideally, in an ideal world, you wouldn't need that call, because everyone would just update their defect and put the status on there and add commentary every time there was a change, and you could just go into that and look at it. But this is real world, and in the real world you always need management and pressure on these things. So it's just there as a control, as a means to keep the pressure on and make sure people are being quick and responding quickly, and we're trying to get through these defects as quickly as possible. So get your defect call set up and make sure you've got someone who is quite strong in running it, who can cut through the bullshit and cut through the chat if they need to, and keep the pace moving on. So that's your next tip. Next one is Be prepared to manage handoffs when you are looking at defect fixes. Often there's lots of people involved in fixing a defect. You might, let's give you an example. Let's say your business raises it first of all, this needs to be assigned to, the defect needs to be assigned to someone. That someone needs to assign it to an engineer. The engineer needs to fix it, and they need to go back to the business with another question. And once it's been fixed, the business need to retest it. They need to confirm that and go back to the engineer. There's lots of handoffs, and in this world, as I alluded to earlier, the timelines are so aggressive and the pace is very fast. So minutes and hours really count, and you don't want to waste hours when it's just been, a defect has been sat with someone, they didn't realize they were supposed to do something. So if you can get involved in the defect management process, and I recommend you try and clear out as much stuff as you can to really focus on this, because it's really important. So you can jump all over those handoffs or get your defect manager to do it, and make sure you've got a Teams chat set up so you can chat and make sure you can see the handoffs. And if you can see something's not happening, get all over it and just give them a call or go to their desk or ping them to make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Because it's really frustrating when you get to a defect status call and the whole day has gone by and nothing's been done on it because someone didn't realize they were supposed to do it. So you've got to be all over those handoffs. It's really important. The minutes count in this world. Okay, the next tip is, you need to be prepared to try and influence people. So especially in these last phases of testing, when you've got the business testing, let's say you're creating a product or upgrading a system for people in your organization that already use this application. So they're business people, they've got their usual day-to-day job to do, but usually you pull them in to support with testing. So it's not really their priority. They don't really care a great deal, not as much as you do as a project manager or your core team do. Some of them will, but not everyone will. So it's not really the priority sometimes for them to get the testing done. So that's why you want to influence them to get it done as quickly as possible. And sometimes I'm doing my head thing again, let's go back up here. Sometimes you might just have to be nice to them or just be firm with them, whatever way you need to influence them. It's better to be friendly than the other way around and be too aggressive and too strict. Otherwise you just irritate people and they just start ignoring you. It's a fine balance between chasing people and being firm and badgering them, because if you badger them too much, then they'll just start getting sick of you and they'll just ignore you. So you've got to have a good manner about you. This is where the people skills comes in, and the better your people skills, the better you can influence these people to get their tests done, buy them a beer, whatever, make a promise for a coffee, whatever you need to do. But just be prepared, you might want to influence people to get the testing done quickly. Next thing is make sure people are providing regular updates for you, especially the engineers. It's tempting for them, or understandable, that if they are working on a problem, it's been assigned to them, they're investigating the issue and they're trying to fix it, they don't need to update you until they've got a breakthrough or a solution. And that's understandable, but they don't understand it from the project manager side. You've got a lot of pressure from above. You'll be just so you know, you'll be expected to update on the testing status and defect status a lot to senior management. They want to know what's going on. They're constantly asking for updates. You've got a lot of pressure on you. So if you have an engineer that's just being silent for all day, if you could really trust them, you'd be like, yep, I'm sure they're just working on it, but you don't know. So you need to get them to give you an update, even if there is no update. No news is bad news in this world, because again, it can happen. You trust that person. They don't update you all day. Then at the end of the day, you said, right, did you get that fixed? And they're like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was supposed to be doing that. And you're like, so you've wasted the whole day. So it's really important that you try and communicate to your engineers and the people doing the testing why it's important they give the updates and the other side of the perspective and what the upper management are expecting. And it doesn't take long. So just try and get that established and get that confirmed in the roles and responsibilities at the start of your testing, and get them on side to do that, because you don't want to be waiting a whole day without any updates, because that is very risky. You don't want to take that chance. Okay, what's the last one? The last one is just bear in mind, you're going to often have to go live with your product or your software, whatever you're building, with defects. You can't always fix them all, and some of them are more severe than others. And if that is the case, you're going to have to get the business people to agree to that, or various stakeholders to agree to it. They're going to have to live with this defect, at least for the time being, until you can get a fix in after go live, which is often the case. So if you sense that you're not going to be able to fix a defect in time, you just start having those conversations with the people that are going to ultimately sign off that go live and say, yeah, we accept that defect. Get them on board. It's best to speak to them throughout the testing phases. Let them understand what the big issues are and what it means for them. What is the actual impact of that defect? And when you're asking for the impacts of defects, or you're trying to work it through, it's important that you actually get the actual impact to the real world, not just some technical jargon impact that you don't understand. You need to say, well, what does that actually mean in the real world if you don't get this fixed? What is the downstream impact? What does it mean? Does it mean we can't get a report created with accurate data? Okay, well, what does that mean? What's the impact of that? Okay, we might get fined because our reporting is incorrect, or it might be nothing. So you need to understand the impact of these defects so you can explain that to your stakeholders if you have to live with any of these defects. And make sure you have workarounds in place if there are any, all that kind of stuff. So just be prepared and start having those conversations if you're getting close to your go live and you've got defects open that you don't think you're going to get fixed in time. Okay, I've gone way over time there today. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. Give it a thumbs up if you learned something. And if you want to see more videos like this one, I'm doing them daily, about 10 minutes each. So hit that subscribe button, and I will see you tomorrow.